Hi, I'm Sharon Mackless at IDG, here with a bonus Do More with R video, create an interactive Shiny web app to track tweets by a hashtag. The main episode showed how to search for tweets, import them into R, and create a sortable, filterable table. This video takes that code further with additional search and filter capabilities. Let's get started. Here in RStudio is the code from the main episode. If you want to go over that, head to episode 41 on YouTube or InfoWorld. Now let's turn it into a local interactive Shiny app with even more filtering possibilities. First, I'll create a new Shiny app in a new subdirectory in RStudio by going to File, New File, and Shiny Web App. I'll call my application Twitter Search, but you can call it anything. And I'll pick a single file app. You'll get a default Shiny app. The UI portion of a Shiny app is the user interface, or front-end HTML page that the user, in this case you, interacts with. The server portion is the back-end R code that does all the computing to make a user's request actually work. I typically first delete most of the comments in the default app file, change the title, and load all the packages I need. I don't need this. I'll load some libraries. Okay, I'm going to be using RTweet. dplyr, always use dplyr. Oh, but I misspelled library. Why I should be using autocomplete. Glue. Reactable. And per. Save that. I'm going to change the name. Search tweets. Sidebar. I don't need bins. I don't need that comment. Server logic, one application. Alrighty. And if I run this, you see what the default app looks like. You get a histogram, which you can change based on user input. Next, I'll add my code that searches for tweets, imports them to R, and wrangles a version to display in a table. But I'm going to shinyfy it a bit. I know I'm going to want the URL HTML formatting function I made in the main episode. I'll copy that URL function into the top of my app file before all the interactive code. Let me find that. Here's my function. Copy that. Put that on the top here before all the interactive Shiny code. I could also put it in a separate helper file and source that file. Next, I'll add code to create the initial Twitter data frame from my search query. That goes in the app's server section. Since that data frame will change and update depending on what the user requests, I need to make it a reactive object. So far, there are two items that the user can change: the hashtag search query and the number of tweets to return. So you can see here in the main code. But instead of hard coding the values at the top of the file, I want to add those as inputs my users can change. That means adding two user input fields in the app.rui section, hashtag to search and num tweets to download. I'll create a text box for entering the hashtag and a numerical input box or slider for entering the number of tweets to request. For number of tweets, I can start off using the default slider that came in the initial app right here. However, I'm going to change its ID instead of bins to num tweets to download. Whoops, download. I'm going to change the label to say number of tweets to request, the minimum value to 100, the maximum value 18,000, although I'm never really going to call that, and my default value to 200. I'm also going to delete everything in the server section between these brackets here, because now that I've changed the inputs, the output isn't going to work anymore. So let me save that. If I run the app by clicking on the Run button, I have a slider, although it doesn't do anything yet. You can see it can be a little difficult to get the exact value you want when moving a slider when you have a large range of numbers. So I'm going to change that slider to a numeric input box. Everything else will remain the same. Save that, run. And now I have a box that I can actually type into. Next, I'm going to add a text input box for the hashtag query with Shiny's text input function. I'll set the box's input ID to be hashtag to search, the label is hashtag to search, and the default value as the RStudioConf hashtag. Let me add that. I'm going to use the text input function, hashtag to search. My label is hashtag to search, and my default value as # RStudioConf. Notice that since I added a second input here, I needed to put a comma after the first one. Getting parentheses and commas correct can be a challenge when coding Shiny apps. So creating inputs and outputs one by one and running the code after each addition can help make it easier to spot problems. I'm going to save that and run. And now I've got my two inputs. The basic sidebar is finished, but I need one more input in my UI to tell Shiny where I want my tweet table to display. I'll put that placeholder in the main panel here. The default app's main panel has plot output, which tells Shiny to save space for a plot in the main part of the page. I want a Reactable table there, so I'll change plot output to Reactable output. And I'm going to change the input ID also to make it more logical for what I'm doing, tweet table. If I click to run my app now, nothing changed, but we're getting closer. It's finally time to actually get and display the tweets. Just as with the original code, I'll use rtweets search_tweet function to search for tweets and store results in tweets_df, which will contain 90 columns. I'll then create a tweets table data frame from my results, formatted to display in a table, and code the table. All this server logic has to be inside the server portion of the app file. I can reuse my original code with a few modifications. The most important ones: any variable that changes based on user input needs to be reactive, not a conventional R object. I have to create and handle them in slightly different ways than a regular variable, but fortunately, the tweaks are minor. Also, anytime I need the value of a user input, I have to refer to it as input $ variable name and not just variable name. Let's see how that works. To turn a regular value into a reactive one, you can use Shiny's reactive function. So here's the original code to get the Twitter data frame. Here on my server file, I've got that. Type it in, but instead I'm making it reactive. And let's close that with the braces. Save that. And now let's get the code that I used to create the formatted version with fewer columns. Put that here. I also want that to be reactive. But there are a couple of more things I want to do. First of all, to refer to a reactive value, you've got to use parentheses after it, just as if it were a function. because it does change based on input. Second, I want to make sure this exists before I start running calculations, since otherwise my app might run an error if it's trying to create this when the initial data frame doesn't exist. So I'm going to use require, make sure, whoops, but I'm going to spell it correctly, REQ, to make sure it exists. And again, I need to use that parentheses after the variable name because it's reactive. Finally, the table code. It needs a few minor changes. Since the table is a visualization, Shiny needs to know where to put it and what it is. I'll store the table in a variable called output $tweet_table. That connects it with this tweet table in the main panel in my UI. I'll also use the render React table function so Shiny knows what kind of visualization it's creating. And that code should require the presence of the tweet table data frame, or the app might throw an error trying to generate a table from data that doesn't exist. And of course, the code also needs to refer to tweet table data with parentheses, since that's reactive. So let me get that table code from the main episode. Copy that into my server section and make my minor changes. As I said, I want this to be output $tweet table. I want to use render React table function. Let's close that bracket and parentheses. And I want to make sure to refer to tweet table data with the parentheses. Now let me run the app. That's not found. Why is that? Let's take a look. Hashtag to search, and where debugging in real time, I didn't refer to it as input $. Same thing I'm going to need here. Let's run it again. And now I've got my app. I'd like to change the way the app reacts if I change the default hashtag or number of tweets to request, though. By default, Shiny will try to update the data as I'm typing. A lot of times that's cool and useful behavior, but this isn't one of them. I don't want the app to make a call to the Twitter API every time I type a letter or number. I risk bumping into my API limit if I have a long hashtag. So I want a get data button that I click before the request is made to the Twitter API. RStudio recommends an action button for this. As with most things in Shiny, that involves two parts, the UI and the server. For the UI, I can add an action button with the action button function. So let me add this, let me stop this from running, go back to the UI, and add an action button. The action button function, the input ID, I'll call get data. I'll use a label of request tweets. And there are some built-in CSS classes to design the buttons. I happen to like the primary one. Makes it look a little more noticeable. To make that button do something, or more accurately, make it stop the app from doing something until all the input info is ready, I need to change the tweetDF object from a reactive value to a reactive event. That means it doesn't change its value based on a value a user enters, but an action a user takes, like a button click. So let me do that. Let me find the definition here. Instead of reactive, I'm going to say, oops, sorry, I need to say event reactive. And then I need to add an additional argument here so it knows what it's reacting to. And it's reacting to my action button, which is input get data. And I need a comma after that because it's the first of two arguments. If I run the app now, nothing should happen until I click that Get Data button. Nothing happens. Let me request tweets. And now I get my tweets. There are a lot more refinements I might want to do with this app. I can add inputs to filter by date, perhaps, date range. I might want a download button so I can download the data. I cover both of those in the associated article that goes with this bonus video. And I'm sure you could think of even more things you could do to search, sort, and filter. But that's it for this episode. Thanks for watching. For more R tips, head to the Do More with R page at bit.ly/DoMoreWithR, all lowercase except for the R. You can also find the Do More with R playlist on the YouTube IDG Tech Talk channel, where you can subscribe so you never miss an episode. Hope to see you next time.